Hello, Dr. Manly. Welcome to the Life with Love podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's super wonderful to be here.
It's so nice to meet you. And I just want to dive right in. So, your new book is out now, The Joy of Imperfect Love, The Art of Creating Healthy, Securely Attached Relationships. I want you to give me the gist of this, but what inspired you to write this book? Tell me.
Oh my goodness. So each book I've written, this is my fourth, has come like to me like this message, like write this book, often because there is something in my client population, individuals, couples, groups, something that I'm doing where I'm seeing a pattern, a difficulty with dating, or a difficulty with aging, or in this case, a difficulty with love relationships, not just romantic relationships, but parent child, best friends, any relationship that is founded on love, or we really want love to be in it. And I also had noticed that there was an increase in divorce, or people being afraid of marriage, and children saying, I don't like my parents anymore. My parents don't connect with me. And then parents coming to me saying, my kid has divorced me. My kids won't talk to me, things like that. And so I thought, and I know the world, in our world, so many people can't afford therapy, or they can't access therapy, or they're afraid to go to therapy because, it has a stigma for them. And so every book that I write, and in particular, The Joy of Imperfect Love, has so many exercises in it because I love the idea of self-help books because it's bibliotherapy. But often when we read a self-help book, and I've been there, reading this book voraciously, and then coming out the other end and going, well, these are really great concepts, but how do I apply this to my life? How do I go deeper? And so I really make a point of offering exercises that you can read the book and enjoy the case studies and enjoy the concepts. And if you really want to shift your life, you can actually do the exercises. Invite other people to do the exercises with you if you want. And that part I believe is essential because, like any skill in life, and relationships are a skill, we don't learn, we don't change, we don't become a better piano player or better yoga, you know, teacher, or a better writer unless we practice. And yet we believe our relationships should be perfect. They should be terrific with no practice. Well, we're all imperfect, and of course, our relationships, no matter how long we've been in a relationship, parent, child, husband, wife, long-term partner, we want to be working on it in order to help the self evolve, but also help the relationship evolve.
Oh, there's so many parts, and I love this so much. So, right. So, right. It's almost like it would be nice if they taught in school how to have more loving relationships, right? But we don't have that. And so right. And this idea, like you're saying, of having the perfect relationship, would you say, because I would imagine this comes from um gosh, TV and social media, this idea that everything has to be perfect. If it's not, I have to move on or do something else. I think of the show The Bachelor, which I haven't watched in quite some time, but this idea that, like, okay, when I find my perfect match, everything's happily ever after and it's great. And I actually like shows more like Love is Blind or Married at First Sight, because that's a little more gets into the nuances of like why things are, what actual marriage might look like. But would you say that is part in the dating apps, right? Like, is this part of the problem of why we think we need, we need perfect relationships? Tell you kind of just, I know, with the dating apps.
You
Yeah.
are hitting so many of the highlights. Actually, going back to one of the first things that you said that really resonated with me, we do not teach people. We are not taught. I certainly wasn't taught how to date. In fact, I was prohibited from dating because my parents, that was just how they were. I wasn't allowed to date. So when I wrote my third book, Date Smart, it was all about, no matter your age, whether you're 17, 18, 55, 35, 70, there are core concepts about dating that we need to learn, and not from a top-down approach, but from a human approach of saying things like, when you come into a relationship, what do you have to offer? Because we often do it the other way. We go, what do I want from a partner? That's
Yes.
step two. Step one is, who am I? What do I have to offer? Meaning, am I a loving person? Do I want to be a stay-at-home mom? Do I want to, shower my partner with affection? Am I a good cook? Am I fun? Am I quiet? Am I introverted? Who am I? That's the first step that we often bypass. And that's the critical part because that's self-awareness. That's self love ultimately. And then we can, and so now let's pivot to the joy of imperfect love and what you were talking about, the romantic element. We are raised to believe, little girls and boys, people of every gender are raised on fairy tales. Well, Prince Charming and Cinderella meet and they live happily ever after and they wear pretty dresses and they're beautiful and everything goes well. But what we don't realize is that fairy tale and most fairy tales have a long history of giving us messages of how to form relationships. And interestingly enough, Cinderella is one of my favorite fairy tales. Why? Because it has its roots in an old fairy tale called Baba Yaga. And it's really about listening to intuition and growing our feminine sides and our masculine side, so our nurturing side, our strong out in the world side, to bring those sides together, not from another partner, but from the self. So I would go out into the world. I would strengthen my feminine nurturing self. I would strengthen my ability to do and be in the world. I would marry those two. And then I would go out and work with a partner who's doing the same. And then through that process of continuing that work, we would live happily ever after. But we romanticized it and sanitized it to the point where people truly believe that a relationship, I've had this, so many people say this to me, a relationship's not a good relationship if it takes work.
Mm,
And my eyes get big and I just say, tell me any relationship in the world, parent child, work relationships, best friends, that doesn't take effort. Yet you believe that your marriage, your relationship with your romantic partner, your life partner, that won't take work. The other part of that I really find beautiful is that it depends on how you classify the work. For example, weeding a garden. For me, I love going out and weeding a garden. It's part of the process. I love it. Now, for someone, they might look and go, "Oh, no, I don't want to do that. I just want the flowers. I'm going to just pick the raspberries." Well, we have to weed, we have to water, we have to fertilize. So we get that on an organic level with nature. But let's bring it to relationships and realize if you come to a relationship, well, of course it's going to take work, but I love myself, I love my life, and I love my partner so much, or my child so much, or my parents so much, or my best friend so much that I want to weed, fertilize, and water the relationship. Is it work? Sure it is. But are you doing it with optimism and joy and devotion? That's what makes or breaks it.
I love that analogy. Yeah, about the because my husband and I are working on our garden at the moment. I hate weeding, and I'm wondering if the analogy. I know it does. It takes work. I know. So, um, and so when we're talking about the work, what does that look like tangibly? Like when you're in a marriage or you're in a friendship and things just aren't clicking and something's off, what does that look like? And what do you tell your clients when you're talking to them about, someone who says, I don't want to do the work. I mean, what do you say?
So I'll go back to you and your hubby gardening, right? Because it answers it in a way. Often in relationships, the person who doesn't like to do the weeding likes to do the canning or the harvesting, or they like to grow the babies from seeds. So that's one of the beautiful parts of love relationships or any relationship that we can look and say, well, I don't really like doing the weeding, but I'm willing to invest by purchasing the baby seeds and planting the seeds. And so, honey, since I don't like the the weeding, what do and he may say, well, I don't like the weeding either. So that's cool because then you get to split it 50-50, both do a task that you don't really like, but you're sharing it. Or he may say, you know what? I absolutely love doing the weeding, but growing those babies from scratch, no, that's too much detail for me. I can't be in the high mortality rate of those little seedlings. And no, I don't like that. So we can see that in relationships, that if we bring that energy, what I was just describing there was balance, that we have to bring that idea of, I call it in the Joy of Imperfect Love, I call it reach towards or push aways. That almost everything we do in a relationship, a criticism, is it negative or is it constructive feedback? What are we doing when we see our partner's shoes in the way? Do we leave them there? Do we gripe? Or do we say, hey, sweetheart, I've tripped on these. Do you mind keeping them over here? Or I moved them in the future. Could you watch? So if we just become a little more mindful that almost everything we're doing, again, whether it's to a parent, a partner, a child, a bestie, we get to choose. Am I reaching toward that person or am I pushing them away? And once you become aware of that concept, it is such a game changer. It does take mindfulness, but here's the beautiful part of it. We are imperfect. So let's say we're so used to criticizing, it's like, not enough salt, not enough this. Once we catch ourselves doing that and say, wow, I just did 20 pushaways in a minute, then we can say, oh, sweetheart, I'm sorry. I'm working on this highly critical part of myself. Please be patient with me as I change.
Mm,
So I think that's a big piece. The other piece that you brought up is when a relationship isn't clicking, what do we do about that? We want to find out what's not clicking. And sometimes that also takes a lot of mindfulness, saying, is it that my partner is not active enough and I'm a really active person? Is it that my bestie is really gregarious and I'm an introvert, or my husband's, really talkative and I'm too quiet and he's always trying to push me? What is it? Are there little flaws in the other person that you're focusing on the flaws? And there are some flaws that are deal breakers. But here's what I really believe about perfectionism: it will suffocate the soul. If you look at me and start picking me apart and only seeing my flaws, oh, this is wrong with you, this is, oh, da, 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 then you're not going to see the beauty in me. You're not going to see my energy, my kindness. You're just going to pick me apart. And we can do that with anyone or anything. We can just start tearing it to pieces to where we're missing the beauty. And every person has so much beauty in them. So are we going to focus on the beauty just like a child? Are we going to focus on what the child's doing well and lean into that? And of course, give them gentle corrections when they need to. And that's the part of the attachment, but we can get into that. And that's why perfectionism suffocates the soul. If you put me in a room or you in a room with any person, you start or I start picking at them, they're going to leave feeling depressed, anxious, and not liking us very much. However, if we meet someone, go, oh my goodness, you have such gorgeous energy. You're wonderful. You look at all of you. We've created a connection. And I think that some people say, oh, well, that's all rose-colored glasses. Well, of course, we don't want to ignore red flags. If somebody is engaging in toxic habits, gaslighting, hypercriticism, dishonesty, and I cover that in the Joy of Imperfect Love, because I believe at the foundation of every healthy relationship is a genuine friendship. And I don't use the term friendship very loosely or lightly. I believe that friends are people who really have forged relationships with us, who are kind, honest, respectful, show us integrity, there are 7 pillars of friendship. And I really believe that when we have two people bringing those pillars of friendship into a relationship, that's where the friendship comes from. That's what takes us through thick and thin and for better or for worse, whether we're married or whether we're just besties, from childhood or college.
yeah, there's so much there. So I guess uh well, why don't we touch on attachment? Because yeah, I know that's kind of like a big buzzword now, but how does that sort of play into what you're talking about, this idea of attachment?
I love the theory of attachment. It is one of the most well-researched, if not the most well-researched field of psychology. And just giving a brief overview for listeners who don't know much about it, it basically started in the 1950s with a wonderful man named John Bowlby, who noticed that children who were separated from their parents during the war had difficulty in their lives. And from that, some seminal work around concepts like that, then and built on work by Winnicott, and then this woman named Mary Ainsworth, who really took attachment theory and worked on it. So what we have in attachment theory is two sides. We have secure attachment and we have insecure attachment. And secure attachment is secure. Generally, you received healthy attunement in early childhood. Parents paid attention to you more often than not in a healthy way, and you became securely attached. Winnicott coined the phrase the good enough mother, which is now the good enough caregiver. You don't need to be on point 100% of the time. 85%, 90%, that's human, that's imperfect, but a good enough imperfect. Then we have those who did not receive healthy attunement, and they grow up to be either dismissive, like, I'll be in a room with you, I'll have a relationship with you, but we're going to be like roommates, ships passing in the night. Then you have the person who is what we often call anxious, but it's the ambivalent style where they are very worried in relationships, very preoccupied with the relationship. Will I be loved? Will I be safe? Will you love me? So very insecure. And then you have and they're all insecure, but it comes out in different ways. And then you have the unresolved style, which is more chaotic. It's kind of more of a blend of the of the other two styles, but often a lot of emotional dysregulation, dysfunction in the relationship. And so when we look at those styles, someone who's listening might say, "Oh, that's awful. I see myself in one of those. I'm doomed." You're not doomed at all. I, given my childhood, had an insecure attachment style, and I earned a secure attachment style. How? You do self work.
Mhm.
And here's the lovely part. When you're actively working on yourself, you can do it if you're single, of course, but if you actively work your stuff in the context of a relationship with friends, with loved ones, with a partner, it's putting the attachment work on steroids because you're mindfully bringing these concepts in and you're able to say, when you do this, I feel really sad. When you do this, it provokes my anxiety. Could you refrain from that? Healthy partner or one who's also trying to earn secure attachment will say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Now I get it. I get that when I slam the door and leave, I'm triggering your attachment issues. I won't do that anymore." The unhealthy partner will be like, "Oh, cool. Let me pocket that information and I will slam the door. I will gaslight you. Oh, yeah, now I'll capitalize on this." Not a healthy relationship. So again, if we look at that and say, child is stuck with this during childhood, but as you grow up, once you realize, wait a second, I want to change this, because if you don't change it, you will parent your own children if you have children in that same way. It will tend to affect all of your relationships in negative ways. So I just love attachment theory. It's very well researched. The longitudinal studies are amazing. And it gives all of us hope because we can look and say, I'm going to be imperfect, we're all imperfect. And that takes so much pressure off when we realize, oh, you mean all I need to do is pay attention to what I'm doing and every day just try a little bit harder to be my best self? That's all you're asking? I say, yeah. It's like, whoa, that makes it so much easier.
Right, because I think I mean, and maybe I'm wrong, you tell me, because it sounds like, with some of your clients, you might talk about this, but that this idea, well, I need to work on myself. So, like, I can't be in this relationship because I need to get better. And then I'll find somebody who is, maybe better well suited for me because I'll be in a different place. But like you're saying, it's possible to maybe if we show up different in the relationship, the dynamic will change, right? And it could get better.
Absolutely. And so you did get it very right. The only caveats are if you're fresh out of a very toxic relationship, fresh out of a divorce, fresh out of, trauma, haven't done your work, it's generally a good idea to dive into some group therapy or individual therapy to regain a sense of yourself,
Hmm.
to feel a bit stronger, almost like having two broken legs, right? You don't want to go out and try and run a marathon. Best give yourself some time to heal, walk again. And then, and because what will happen sometimes, and I get this a lot, people will say, why am I always attracting narcissists? Like every person I date is abusive, a narcissist, da, da, da. Well, it's because you likely had someone in your childhood who modeled that for you. You're not broken. You just inherited this these patterns, and what you learned was, oh, I am supposed to love and tolerate narcissists. So now you go out and you're not wearing that on your forehead or a tattoo on your arm, but the narcissists will pick up
Hmm.
that you will tolerate them. So if you realize that you have a pattern, it's really lovely to work on that pattern, get some core strength. And one of my taglines for my own podcast, Imperfect Love, is you do not need to love yourself perfectly to love others well. So we will never, if I needed to love myself perfectly to love others well, then I would never be able to love anyone because
Yeah.
I see love as this lifelong journey. And every new person who comes into my life, whether it's a client or a friend, I'm always adjusting myself. And the same with, my husband. I do need, and this is a perfect time for a little segue into another topic. This is one of those pieces, as you were talking earlier and saying we have sort of memes in society that we don't realize are so harmful for relationships. One of my least liked memes is the one that says, I shouldn't have to change for my partner.
Mm.
Oh my goodness, how self-limiting. We're willing to change for work. We're willing to put on a uniform or, to write in a different way or speak in a different way. Or why wouldn't we want to change? We are going to change throughout life. It's a given. Do we want to be in charge of our change? Or do we want to be reactive and saying, I'm not changing for my partner? That's goofy. I change all the time. If my partner says, hey, honey, will you add more sugar to this? I might be like, would really rather not, but okay, if you want more sugar, all right, of course. And and that's a minor thing where my partner may come up with a new hobby and say, hey, would you enjoy this hobby with me? Well, it might not be my old hobby, but yeah, sure, I'll give it a try. Or my partner may say, hey, Carla, that's something you said that felt hurtful to me. Oh my God, I've said that all my life, but it's hurting you? Of course I'll change. And if I slip and do it again, call it to my attention and I'll work at it. I don't want to harm you. So we can see there are so many ways now where we don't want to change in relationships is if somebody's asking us to let go of our moral compass, do something toxic,
Hmm.
change our priorities, our values to where we lose part of the self. But there are a lot of ways I can change in life without losing a part of myself. And so I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions that holds people back, this idea of I'm not going to change for my partner. Well, hey, I ask all of the time, what would love do? And love often asks us to pivot, to be flexible, to change.
I love it. Yeah. That's really good. Yeah. So, um, I feel like there's so much I want to cover. So, I think of nowadays we have dating apps, right? And you have this idea that you can just swipe and this person, I don't like blue eyes, I like brown, so I'll go to the next one. What is your sort of take on this and people who are actively on the apps? How can we sort of apply what you're talking about to this?
I think that dating apps are really wonderful in many ways. Because we no longer live in close-knit communities and the world is becoming more secular, we don't have the natural opportunities that
Mhm.
we once had to meet people who are like-minded. We're spread out. Many people go from work straight to home or stay at home and don't leave for work. So I think dating apps, like any part of technology, have a really lovely upside, but there is tremendous downside. And there's great research into what's called the paradox of choice.
Mhm.
And the paradox of choice, it started with, sounds like you know the studies,
I've
and
read the book, yes, and
yes, and it started with being in a supermarket, right?
Mhm.
Having choices of jams. And
Yeah.
if you have three jams to choose from, you pick one and you go on your way, and you're pretty happy that you picked raspberry instead of grape or strawberry, and you're on your way. But if we give someone 28 choices, now they get confused, they vacillate, they may buy one, they're actually less likely to buy one, and whichever one they leave that store with, they're going to be less satisfied than the person who had just the three choices, because they're going to be second guessing. Did I get the right one? Did I get the
Mhm.
right one? So when we apply that to dating, we can see that having so much choice can ultimately make us unhappy with the person that we're with, because we're wondering two things. Did I choose the right one? And we're also wondering, well, if this one's good, there's got to be something better out there. There's got to be, the man that's 6'4", dark hair, hazel eyes, broad shoulders, everything I want him to be. And so we tend to become a little more oriented toward the flaws of whomever we have ended up with, rather than this fictional, image in our mind of Prince Charming or Cinderella or Snow White, whatever our thing is. So I think that what we want to do when we're dating is to be really mindful, going back to my book, Date Smart, being mindful, and it's also in the Joy of Imperfect Love, but more in that book because it's about dating. Really take an inventory of who you are. Let your profile reflect that. Be honest from the get-go. If you do anything, be honest. You want to be in a hookup relationship? Say that. You want a long-term relationship? Say that. You want kids? Say that. You want to be married, and say it. Because we're so afraid, we've become so afraid that we want to please people and be liked by so many people, that we forget to be authentic.
Mhm.
And if somebody's not going to love you for who you are in your authentic state, then it doesn't mean that you don't want to put on a pretty picture or a handsome picture, an attractive picture, but you don't want to put on one that is you 10 years ago, or you that's all filtered to heck. So when you meet that person in real life, that you're not recognizable. So I think it goes with know yourself, set up your profile so that it's inviting, but also truly reflective of who you are. And then when you're doing your swipe left, swipe right, be really mindful of not just going by the picture. Pictures do tell us something, but slow down to pay attention to the person behind the scenes, behind that picture. Because often, if we slow down to look at that, we might have missed that that person likes to rock climb. We might miss the fact that that person likes St. Bernards, and oh my God, we love St. Bernard. I love a St. Bernard. We might miss that that person is a vegetarian, and we can't handle vegetarians. I mean, I'm a vegetarian, but or that we have to have somebody who is also a vegetarian, whatever it is. But we miss that because we become so hyper focused on how much money someone's making, what they look like, and what that very curated image that may not reflect that person at all. So I think that that's a big piece. And I do have clients who have met their significant others online. And it has often been someone who at first glance, they just took a risk. They just took a risk. And what I always say is because people get really down, you know, because dating online can be so difficult. You have to go through so much. And they say, oh, dinner after dinner, outing after outing, ages of conversation to get to this point. And then I meet the person and it just wasn't a good fit. And I tell people, I say, meet someone for coffee as
Mhm.
soon as possible in a public place. Allow 15 minutes, 30 minutes, have a conversation. And that way you're not using 3 months of your time to find out, oh, you know, they're 8 feet tall and they said they were, 5'4", or they're, 5'4" and they said they were 6'3", whatever
Yeah.
the deal is. Or they said that they were a software engineer and they show up, with the Starbucks apron on. Not that that's a problem, but you would want to understand, well, you told me you were a software engineer. Why the Starbucks apron?
Yeah.
So we want to, and there are things that we see when we meet someone in public, in a safe place, that can be absolutely fascinating, but also, on the other hand, could be something where you realize, oh my God, this person, the tobacco stains on their teeth, that was a dead giveaway for me, or whatever it is. So I think that's a really lovely way to look at online dating. It is what you make of it.
Yeah, and what would you say would be the key that, because well, I actually met my husband on Hinge, which I, never would have expected. But yeah, like you're saying, he something that struck me is my husband and I were actually very different. We have, I think similar core things in common, but we have very different sort of lifestyles. We grew up very different. And so, I think sometimes there's this perception that maybe we have to have a lot in common to get along and have a good long-term relationship. But I would say maybe that's not the case, that maybe it's about looking at some other um, core things that kind of, help the relationship move forward. Like, what would you say about that?
It's a really good point. And a lot of people say things like oil and water don't mix.
Hmm.
And that's actually proven in research, that if you're very, very different from someone, that it tends to not work. But what is really critical, I was just doing an article for someone this morning on this particular piece. What is core is personality similarity. So not you could be a yoga instructor and that could be your favorite thing in the world, and your husband could be a triathlete or a couch potato, but as long as you have similar personality styles,
Mm,
that is a really core piece. It's also important because then that tends to lead to a convergence in what I find extremely important, our values and priorities. And I talk a lot about that in the Joy of Imperfect Love, that we really need to know what our values are. So, for example, if you value family more than anything in life, and you met up with a partner who values family, 82nd on their list, it will likely create a lot of havoc in your relationship. But if your partner maybe puts financial success as number one, but close second is family, then you could likely work through some balancing on it. It also, even for people where there's someone who's really religious and the other person is an atheist, it can work as long as both personalities are those that honor differences. But
mm,
if one personality is hypercritical and like my way or the highway, you be Christian or nothing, right? Well, then it's not going to work. So we can see that it's not the priority in that case that's the problem, as much as it is an intolerance.
mm,
And so I do think also that when we're somewhat different from our partners, my partner's much like me in many ways, but very, very different from me in many ways. And that can add challenge, which is can be fun, like the weeding of the garden, but it can also add sparkle. because we have someone who, I take my husband in directions. Sometimes he's like, "What?"
Yeah.
I'm all philosophical and deep conversations, and he's like, let's talk about
Sports.
F1 cars." Yes.
Yeah.
And so I've amped up. I also like F1 cars, so I've amped up my interest. That was, in F. So because we want to do that, that's the part where I was talking about change, where we want to be able to lean into, not become our partners, but we don't want to have parallel lives. And that takes us to the four styles in relationships. And I talk about this in the Joy of Imperfect Love, that if you are very dissimilar, you will live parallel lives, particularly if you are that attachment style that is very distanced, very dismissing. So we have parallel lives, we have intertwined lives that go in and out like a nice loose braid. And that's called what I call interdependent, a fluid style. Then we have a very enmeshed style that's like spaghetti all glommed up. And that works for some people. And so I'm not dismissing that. Some people really like just breathing every second of life together, and that's as long as it works. That's And then we have this style that is divergent, where two people are on such different trajectories that they just grow apart. And so of course it sounds like you and your husband are in this sort of lovely place where you're different but you're coming together and going apart. So, and what makes that beautiful is you're able to be independent, but you're not stuck in hyper independence,
Mhm.
and you're not stuck in hyperconnection. You're able to go in and out. And I think that is a relationship style that is one that we can all aspire to look at and maybe to embrace, because it allows the autonomy that's so important, but it also allows us to let someone live their life.
Yeah, and that's so funny you brought it because yeah, my husband, I'm a super like health freak. I'm into all my organic and my husband, he loves his sports and football. I've actually gotten into sports documentaries, just like you're saying. And we just watched the Full Swing Golf documentary. I'm obsessed with golf now, which I never would have thought would have happened ever. And he'll occasionally go to the store and pick up, like organic bananas instead of regular. Like, so it is sort of like this idea of right growing to, and I like that idea of the braid kind of intertwining lives every now and
Yes.
again. Yeah, I like that.
And notice how he changed. Something
Yeah,
as simple as, "Oh, she's on my radar. I won't buy the regular bananas. I'll buy organic."
yeah,
And but it seems simple, but it's a sign of seeing you, of being mindful, of being
yeah,
respectful, and willing to change in a healthy way. I
yeah.
just think it's fabulous when couples do that. And that's what I try and offer in the Joy of Imperfect Love, actual tips and tools so that people can start noticing some of their mental processes, because it's our mindsets. Our mindsets are created by our emotions, our thoughts, our feelings,
Mhm.
and then they become mindsets, and then they move into actions. And too often we're not aware of that interplay, and we're just being ruled by these, and our emotions are great, but we want to become in touch with them so they're not ruling us and sending us in ways that are the result of old patterns that don't serve us or our relationships.
Yeah. And so I know you brought this up that there are just certain things that we should not really be tolerating if they happen. Would you mind going over a couple of those things that we just maybe shouldn't look over?
Absolutely. First is someone who is hypercritical of us. It's absolutely healthy in relationships to give constructive feedback and say, "Hey, this is my preference. Would you do this? Would you do that, please?" But if you have a partner who's constantly criticizing you to the point of being abusive,
Mm,
that is something that we don't want to tolerate. Why? Because it erodes self-esteem. It erodes self-confidence. It erodes love. And we don't want to erode love. So I think hypercriticism is one. Behaviors like gaslighting, having somebody, a partner who makes you doubt your reality, doubt who you are, doubt your place in life, doubt your perceptions of life. That can be really toxic. The other part, and I go into this so deeply because it's such an important piece, is healthy communication. I have so many people tell me, I'm conflict avoidant. I'm conflict avoidant. Well, even that mindset, so we want to notice the mindset, I am conflict avoidant. So the minute I think of having a discussion with you, you may say, hey, Dr. Carla, let's talk about X, Y, or Z. And I go, oh, I'm conflict avoidant. I've just put a wall up to myself, to you, to growth, to change, to understanding, to connecting. So what I would want to do in that case is realize, oh, what in my past has led me to be afraid of conflict? Am I actually afraid of conflict? Or am I afraid to speak my truth? Where did this come from? Did I have a
Mhm.
parent or a teacher who, derailed me or criticized me or scared me? Was I abused? What is it? Do I need to do some self work? Or is it my partner I'm afraid of or my boss? Like, what's happening here? So once we understand, then we can work on a neuro-linguistic level to say, for example, to my partner, I don't fight. I'll discuss with you, I'll have conversations with you, but I will not fight with you. Why? When we think of fight, it brings up a warring energy. It brings up a you'll lose, I'll win kind of energy, which is going to be so toxic. So, and for many men, they were raised to fight, to go into war, to battle. And no, 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 not doing that. So we want to be aware of someone who can't engage in healthy conflict, can't have discussions, can't communicate. And I emphasize the commune part of communicate. So those that I've worked with who were conflict avoidant, once they learn what the underpinnings are and how to have healthy communication. So that is another key piece in relationships. Again, I love, love, love this. Why? Because we can learn it. Unlike intellectual intelligence, which tends to have a set point, right? We're
Mhm.
either born, with certain abilities or not. We can learn them like math, but there's often, like me, I'm not great at math. I'll never be, an Einstein at
Same.
math, right? So I can't but for when we look at emotional intelligence, it is a muscle we can all strengthen. We all can do it. It may be clunky at first. It may feel icky. I teach reflective listening, also known as mirroring, a lot with couples, and it does feel clunky at first. But once you learn it, it's also something that women tend to do naturally. Many women, not all women, so I don't want to overgeneralize. Some men also, doesn't it's not really a gender issue as much as it's how we're socialized, and it then becomes embraced more by one gender. But I really think that so much about the big red flags come from childhood patterns that date back to what was modeled. Not no words, no use blaming or shaming parents. It's just what was modeled. Was it healthy? Was it unhealthy? Did it promote healthy emotional intelligence, secure attachment, or not? And if not, wonderful. Let's change it. Let's correct it. Let's go on this imperfect journey together and become healthier. And here's the cool part, that once we embrace those skills, we feel better in all areas of our life. It's not just romance. Again,
Mhm.
it's parent child, it's work relationships. Why? Because you become more in touch with your truth, more in touch with self love, self care, self esteem, which is different from self confidence. And then your relationships get better, your friendships get better, and your home environment. And this is one of my core principles. If you're not safe and loved at home, you can never be your best self, because home is where we start from. And if the home, whether you live in a 2 by 2 apartment or a mansion, doesn't matter. If you are not in a safe, healthy, loving environment with yourself and the people who are with you, you will never be your best self, because neurobiologically you're going to feel unsafe, you're going to be hypervigilant, you're going to be reactive,
Mhm.
because that's your survival mechanism. So if we can work on creating healthy love on the home front, start teaching this in grade school. Start teaching parents in a non-blaming way. Start teaching it in, relationship education courses. My goodness, we will have a healthier society overall. I just so believe in it. And I love the research behind it. And I love giving kudos to the people like John Bowlby who made these gifts that we can choose to embrace today and say, oh, we can make a difference in the world. We can.
Yeah. Well, there's this was such a wonderful conversation. Like you're saying, I think there's so much good stuff. And like you said, we talked a lot about romantic relationships, but like you said, you can apply this to, it seems, most any area of your life. And like you're saying, I agree. I just think, it makes me sad that there's so many divorces happening and so many people who are unhappy in relationships and who are struggling in relationships. And so I love your book and I love what you're doing. And so I'm so grateful that you came on the podcast to take the time to talk about this.
Thank you. And I do want to say the part about just this last piece when people talk about, oh, we shouldn't get married because look at the divorce statistics.
Hmm.
I always say, well, why are you just looking at that statistic? What about the statistics for the people who aren't married? The only reason you're not looking at them is they're not recorded in a government office.
Mm.
So we don't know we only know marriage statistics because they're recorded by the government. The government's not recording how many one night stands break up, how many 3-month relationships break up, how many long-term unmarried relationships break up because we aren't recording. There's no way to record it. So when we look at marriage and say, oh, I don't want to get married because it might end in divorce, any relationship can end up in divorce. Parent-child can end up in divorce. So we don't want to not enter a relationship out of fear. We just want to be more mindful of entering relationships saying, I'm willing to do the weeding. I'm willing to do the watering. I'm willing to, okay, you do the weeding, I'll do the watering. I'm willing to do some work here to be my best self, help you be your best self, and help our relationship be the best it can be.
And we come full circle.
Yes.
Dr. Carla, it was so wonderful to talk to you. And why don't you tell people where they can get your book if they want to get it, and anything else you want to add that we didn't get to?
Thank you. You can find my book on Amazon through my publisher Familius, Barnes and Noble. Request it from your local bookstore. I'm a big fan of buying local. And also you can go to my website, Dr. Carla Manly, Manly. You can find me on all of the usual social media places, TikTok, Instagram at Dr. Carla Manly, Facebook at Dr. Carla Manly. And I also, within about a month, have companion cards coming out to the book. And the companion cards, so here's what the book looks like.
Uh-huh.
And the companion cards are called Imperfect Love, Relationship, and Oracle cards. And so they're lovely because for people who just want a quick fix of something to work on, to reflect on, that's what they're there for. Just one card at a time. You can pull it out and reflect on it, and you don't even need to do anything. Why? I'm a big believer when we plant something positive in the mind, just like an organic banana idea, it'll come around, somewhere the work happens and then poof, it's taken effect.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, this is great. Well, thank you so much again. And we'll have to do something more in the future. There's so much more we could talk about. So we'll have to make it
oh
happen.
my goodness, attachment alone is
I know.
its own big. So thank you for having me. It's such a
Absolutely.
pleasure. I appreciate it.